I never asked to be Spider-Man. I never asked for these powers.
Imagine creating the perfect adaptation of a beloved superhero. You nail the tone, you nail the action. The critics are calling it a masterpiece. The fans are absolutely obsessed, ratings are fantastic, and toys are flying off the shelves. You are exactly where every showrunner dreams to be. And then you get a phone call. Your show isn't just canceled, it is legally wiped off the board. You are forbidden from making another episode, not because people didn't watch it, but because two mega corporations just engaged in a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, and your art got caught in the crossfire. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This is exactly what happened to the spectacular Spider-Man. When people ask why this show died, the internet usually points a finger at Disney. But the truth is much darker, far more complicated, and involves a bizarre legal loophole that practically turned Peter Parker into a corporate hostage. Today we are doing a full corporate autopsy on the greatest Spider-Man cartoon ever made. Let's dive in. The year was 2008. Spider-Man 3 had just wrapped up the Sam Raimi trilogy on a highly divisive jazz dancing note. The superhero landscape on television was fine, but scattered. Enter Greg Weisman and Victor Cook. If you know anything about early 2000s animation, Greg Weisman's name carries immense weight. He is the brilliant mind behind Gargoyles and would later create Young Justice. When Weisman and Cook were handed the keys to Spider-Man, they didn't just want to make a cartoon to sell action figures. They wanted to build a definitive, cohesive universe. They operated under a philosophy they called the 5 C's: contemporary, cohesive, coherent, classic, and iconic. Instead of treating the villains like random monsters of the week who just pop out of nowhere, Weisman built a living, breathing ecosystem in New York City. Everything was connected. If you want to understand why this show is considered the gold standard of comic book writing, just look at how they handled the Green Goblin. In almost every other adaptation, the Goblin is just Norman Osborn waking up, putting on a mask, and throwing pumpkins. It's completely predictable. But Weisman treated the audience with respect. He turned the Green Goblin into a season-long murder mystery. Instead of jumping straight to Norman, the show introduces us to the big man of New York's criminal underworld. For weeks, the show heavily implies that the big man is Norman Osborn. But then, in a brilliant twist, Spider-Man finally confronts him, and it's Tombstone.
Surprise, motherfucker!
A cold, calculating, untouchable mob boss operating in plain sight. Tombstone secretly funds the creation of supervillains, like the Sandman and the Rhino, specifically to keep Spider-Man distracted so his illegal operations can run smoothly. Before we get into the absolute legal nightmare of who actually owns this show, if you find it fascinating how billions of dollars in boardrooms dictate the fate of the art we love, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We investigate the business decisions that build and destroy your favorite franchises. It helps the channel out immensely. And right when you think you understand the hierarchy, the Green Goblin shows up. But the Goblin doesn't just attack Spider-Man. He attacks Tombstone. He attacks Oscorp. He is an agent of pure chaos, trying to violently overthrow the established criminal order. The show gives us a dozen red herrings about who is under the mask. By the time the reveal happens at the end of Season 1, it is completely earned. But as brilliant as the Goblin mystery was, it pales in comparison to the emotional devastation of the Venom arc. Most cartoons introduce Eddie Brock purely to become Venom. He shows up, he hates Peter, he gets the alien suit, they fight. Spectacular took a heartbreaking route. They made Peter Parker and Eddie Brock brothers. They bonded over the shared trauma of losing their parents. Eddie is older. He's Peter's mentor. And over the course of 13 agonizing episodes, we are forced to watch that brotherhood decay. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. Eddie sees Peter disappearing, abandoning his friends, keeping secrets. To Eddie, Peter isn't a superhero. He is a selfish kid who only cares about getting photos for the Daily Bugle. By the time Eddie Brock finally bonds with the symbiote, it isn't just a cool comic book moment. It is a tragedy. Venom knows all of Peter's secrets because the symbiote was attached to Peter. But Eddie knows all of Peter's emotional weaknesses because they used to be family. But it wasn't just the villains that made this show a masterpiece. It was how aggressively they grounded Peter Parker. In a lot of adaptations, Peter's financial struggles are just a running joke. He's late for pizza delivery.
Pizza time.
You're late.
His landlord yells at him.
Sorry,
he doesn't pay the rent. And don't try to sneak past me.
And that's the end of it. But Spectacular treated poverty with actual weight. Aunt May wasn't just a sweet old lady handing out wheat cakes. She was a widow terrified of losing her house. When Peter gets a job taking pictures for the Daily Bugle, he isn't doing it to buy a car or impress a girl. He is desperately trying to keep the electricity turned on, and the show constantly forces Peter to make impossible choices. Spider-Man's victories always came at the direct expense of Peter Parker's life. And then there is the high school dynamic. Wiseman took characters who were traditionally one-dimensional stereotypes and turned them into real teenagers. Take Flash Thompson. For 40 years of comic history, Flash was just the dumb jock who shoved Peter into lockers. But Spectacular gave him an actual arc. Yes, he bullies Peter. But he is also Spider-Man's most fiercely loyal defender. When the city turns against Spider-Man, Flash is the one standing on the street corner, arguing with adults, defending his hero.
Weak
Evidence.
Get the bugle! There's no way I'm ever gonna believe Spider-Man's turned to crime!
We actually see Flash struggle with his own identity, his injuries playing football, and his complex respect for Peter's academic brilliance. And we cannot talk about this show without talking about the romance, instead of immediately pairing Peter with Mary Jane or killing off Gwen Stacy for shock value. Gwen wasn't a supermodel. She was Peter's nerdy best friend who harbored a massive, unspoken crush on him. When Mary Jane finally enters the picture with the iconic "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot" line, she isn't there to steal Peter away. She actually tries to help Peter and Gwen get together. The romantic tension isn't driven by evil ex-girlfriends or contrived misunderstandings. It's driven by the fact that Peter is a teenager with a secret identity, completely terrified of ruining the lives of the people he loves. It was a masterclass in serialized storytelling. But while the writers were building this perfect universe, the corporate foundation beneath them was already fractured, dating back to a financial disaster from over a decade prior. To figure out how Greg Weisman's masterpiece ended up in a legal meat grinder, we have to rewind to December 27th, 1996. This is the day the comic book bubble burst, and Marvel Entertainment Group officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Marvel was bleeding out. The speculator boom of the early 90s, where people bought 5 copies of every comic thinking they'd be millionaires, had completely collapsed. Marvel owed hundreds of millions of dollars. They were desperate for cash just to keep the lights on. So, they started pawning off the film rights to their most iconic characters in what essentially amounted to a corporate fire sale. The X-Men and Fantastic Four went to 20th Century Fox. The Hulk went to Universal. And Spider-Man, the crown jewel of the Marvel Empire, went to Sony Pictures for a mere $7 million. But this wasn't just a standard movie deal. The contract Sony signed with Marvel was an absolute behemoth. Because Marvel was negotiating from a position of total weakness, Sony demanded and received unprecedented control. The contract gave Sony the exclusive rights to make live-action Spider-Man films. But buried in the fine print was a clause that would eventually destroy Spectacular Spider-Man. The contract also gave Sony the rights to produce animated television shows, as long as the episodes were standard television length, over 22 minutes long. If Marvel wanted to make a Spider-Man cartoon, they were legally restricted to making episodes under 22 minutes, or they had to go through Sony. Sony held all the cards. Fast forward to 2008. Sony is riding high off the Sam Raimi trilogy. They look at their contract and realize, hey, we have the rights to make a cartoon. Let's produce it entirely in-house. They created a subsidiary called Culver Entertainment. They hired Greg Weisman. They funded the animation. This is a crucial detail that most people get wrong. The Spectacular Spider-Man was not a Marvel production. It was a Sony production, leased on Marvel's intellectual property. At the time, this felt like the safest bet in the world. Sony had a monopoly on the web-slinger. The executives at Culver Entertainment were so confident that they had tentatively greenlit Greg Weisman for 65 episodes, 5 full seasons, plotting out Peter's entire high school career. The writer's room was already storyboarding season 3. It was a bulletproof plan. Nothing could stop them, except, of course, the largest entertainment monopoly on the planet, deciding they wanted their toys back. But believe it or not, that wasn't their biggest problem. The real downfall starts in part 2. Stay tuned, subscribe, and don't miss what's coming next.